Our next speaker is DataKind's Chief Program Officer. She's a familiar face to Forward 50. She chaired the Code for America Summit a couple of years ago. She's a software engineer by training, and she's devoted much of her career in civil society as Director of Engineering for New America's Public Interest Technology Program. She was Executive Director of the White House's National Science and Technology Council and held a variety of positions at the FBI. So if you weren't feeling inadequate already, you should now. She's also a wonderful person and a great speaker. And she's here to talk about how to make change happen inside the sometimes rigid structures of processes and government agencies. Please welcome to the Forward 50 stage our good friend Afua Bruce. Hey, Afua.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing better now I see you. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm so glad to be attending another Forward 50 conference. It's one of my favorites of the year.
Well, we miss you on the big round stage. That was an absolute highlight. We can't wait to get back there next year. But one of the few perks of doing it this way is the number of countries that have been able to join us this year, like Rwanda and Mongolia are on board. So it's great to see this kind of movement spreading around the world. I understand you have some interesting stuff to share with us. And then if there's time, I'll be back for a quick chat at the end.
Sounds good. I look forward to it. Hello, everyone. I, again, am just so excited to be joining you today. As was mentioned, I've had an extensive career in public interest technology, getting to work in both the nonprofit sector and in the government sector itself, working on a lot of projects based in the US where I live, but also on a number of projects based externally and around the world. I'm currently the Chief Program Officer at DataKind, which is a nonprofit that harnesses the power of data science and artificial intelligence in service of humanity. We work on a number of different projects doing data science and AI for nonprofits and government agencies. And what I want to talk to you today about is really how to make change happen. And a lot of the work that I encountered with a lot of the partners that we work with through DataKind, I've worked with across my career, and a lot of the people who are actually doing this work, your data scientists, your public interest technologists, your engineers, your designers, and more. The prospect sometimes of working within government structures or even sometimes within nonprofit structures can appear a little daunting. And that is in part because people, when you go into these, what are sometimes seemingly rigid structures with long processes or long timelines to execute change, to what it seems do anything, people can feel a little bit restricted. And so as you start this type of work, you may hear things like, it can't be done. And that might be because people are saying, we've always done it this way, we don't want to change, or that's a really new idea, it sounds really great for someone else, but here we sort of know what we're doing, or we like that idea, we would like to have it here, but because of procurement processes or people involved or the current political climate, we just can't make any change. And this is definitely something I've heard repeatedly in going into a lot of different environments, but I'm here to tell you it can be done. And so I want to talk through a couple of examples today and give you a couple of tools to push back against some of this thinking that structures are too rigid, processes are too long to institute change, and really hopefully give you some techniques and some ideas about how you can move change forward. So let's dive in. Now, as we think about what it takes to move to action, it really requires both intentionality and patience. And so when you have an idea that either you're working within an organization and you want to start something, or you've been called in, such as DataKind is sometimes called in to partner with an organization, or you're on a digital services team and you're working with a new component, a new division, a new department, the first thing that you need to start off by doing is making sure that you're finding the actual problem that needs to be solved. Now, I've been in many situations where people come to you with a problem, and it is a problem that they have decided that you can solve for them, but that might actually not be the real problem. They might have come to you and saying, we really need an app to be able to deliver services better. And when you talk to them, you might discover instead that what they need is a better database system to help them track their requests that they're already getting, and they actually already have a good process of doing. So it's really important to invest the time at the start to accurately define what problem is actually needed and what problem actually needs to be solved before you jump in and do any of that work. The second thing that you want to do is to build a coalition of change agents. Now, if you are the technical person coming into a situation, you may think that your technical skills alone will be enough to help you maneuver any situation. That's a great dream. It probably is not going to be reality. If you are on the side where you've identified a problem and you brought in the correct resources, you may think that's enough. But again, you still need to find that coalition of change agents. And this, very practically speaking, is because change is hard work. When you're working within rigid structures, when you're working around some of the more defined processes, you need to make sure that you have multiple people involved at multiple different points. And so you'll want to, as you're building this coalition of change agents, make sure that you have some people who are on the ground, so to speak, who really understand the issues, the processes, the clients, the people who are ultimately being served. You'll want to make sure that you have members of executive management bought in and part of that change management team. You'll also want to make sure that you have different roles filled. For example, when I was at the FBI, one of the big lessons I learned is that some agents would never listen to a non-agent for particular strategy decisions. And the reality is that sometimes you just need to make sure that you have enough different roles on your team represented so that the right person can be identified as the messenger to critical people who you will need to convince to adopt the change, to advocate for the change, or to live and implement the change after you're done with your process. And then finally, the last thing I want you to keep in mind is to recognize and just really hold true that the success journey goes through phases. There will be days when you feel like you are making so much great progress and you'll finish ahead of schedule. And then you'll run into a procurement issue. Or then someone who perhaps you didn't realize needed to be bought in will raise a red flag on the process. Something else will happen. And you'll get kind of stuck and think that perhaps something is wrong, but nothing is necessarily wrong with your process and your initiative. But the work of implementing change and having success within government structures, within nonprofit structures, is a very cyclical process. And so, really keep that in mind as you hit the highs in your process and you find yourself in that valley of despair or valleys of despair sometimes. And really just keep in mind that it's important to push through, reinforce the strategy and the vision that you started with. Continue to leverage your coalition of change agents, bring it back to the problem that you identified, and continue to push through. So, let me give you a couple of examples of how we've done this at DataKind over the past couple of years. One of my favorite examples is a couple of years ago, John Jay College partnered with DataKind to look at data related to their students. Now, John Jay College is a four-year college in New York, and they serve a variety of clients. They have a very multicultural student base. They have students who are often working jobs as they're in school, have other obligations while they're in school as well. And so they came to us. John Jay College came to DataKind, really seeking DataKind's help in analyzing its data and figuring out what to move forward. And so when we talk about making sure that you're identifying the right problem, as we partnered with John Jay College in those initial conversations, they pointed out that the way their university was structured, the way their college was structured, is that there was a lot of support being given to first time students, being given to freshmen as they joined. But then there was a insignificant number of students who would finish 75% of the credits required to graduate. So 90 out of 120 credits required to graduate and then not finish. And so the question became, why is this so? Why would someone be able to get it together enough to finish so much of their degree and not finish? And so, rather than the general question of how do we get students on campus, how do we make sure they have a good transition to campus, the real problem that we needed to work with John Jay College was what supports need to happen, what characteristics are there about students who complete 75% of the credits required to graduate and don't finish, so we can proactively identify those students. And so the specific questions we were seeking to answer were, is it possible to identify those students who are likely to drop out and in need of support? And then, what are some of the factors that may influence a student's decision to leave school before earning a degree? And with those specific problems identified, we were able to jump into the next stage of the process. We already had formed our coalition of change agents working with multiple people at John Jay College and our DataKind team. They were able to work together, and that collectively became the team. So, as I say, the team looked at this in the future. It is that broader team, and in this case, the team started with exploratory data analysis and really looking at what data John Jay College already had. As an academic institution, they had a lot of data on students that went back several years. And so the team was able to look at that data and do some analysis. And we found that there was a correlation between graduation rates and a number of different factors, whether how many credits per semester a student was taking, what their GPAs had been, if there was a fluctuation in the number of student credit hours people were taking in each semester. So a number of factors actually did correlate with increased graduation rates. Then we went to some of the fun part. It's all fun, don't get me wrong, but the model development was especially fun. And in that process, we did a lot of testing. We tested over 20 different models to see what would generate the correct information, what would be accurate, what would generate actionable insights for the John Jay College team. And in the end, we developed two sets of models, one set dedicated to students who had started their college studies at John Jay College, another set to students who were transferred into John Jay College at some point. And the models with refining the testing with the John Jay College team and that broader team again, the models in the end were able to predict the likelihood of students would predict the likelihood at which students would graduate and identify some potential risk factors. The tool itself was combined with services John Jay College provided. They had a particular office that used the tool to help extend their mission, which is really the goal that we want. We want technology to extend the mission of social impact organizations. And using this tool and letting this process run for 2 years, which was the intended time frame, John Jay College saw incredible results. They saw about 85% of students who were at the 90 credit or above mark graduate within 2 years. This translates to an increase in 4-year and 6-year graduation rates that rose by 8 percentage points for the 4-year graduation rate and 4 percentage points by the 6-year graduation rate. And so when you look at it in concrete numbers, this is more than 600 students who graduated and earned their bachelor's degree at a cost to the university of only $293 per student. So one, that is a cost that John Jay College could absorb. But when you look at this impact, right, you look at the fact that more than 600 students are now who are likely to have dropped out after completing 90 credits now completed. This means they have more job opportunities. This means they have greater earning potential. This means their families will get to benefit from their increased earning potential and possibly increased job security. And so the true impact, again, of properly identifying the problem that could be solved here, making sure that you had that coalition of change agents who were really involved in the process, and then really pushing through the testing of different models that worked, that didn't work, figuring out what was going to be the right intervention, really led to some sustained impact at John Jay College. So the question here that we can reflect on and looking back on the John Jay College example and thinking about what it means to find opportunity and working with structured organizations is how do we improve the system with add-ons and complementary tools and processes? I think a lot of times when people think of innovation, they think of something new. They think of bringing in a new team and starting a new process, or they think of doing something in a completely different way than's ever been done before and wholesale changing over different systems, wholesale changing different processes. But I also want you to think about and really realize that innovation also is innovation in process. You can also look to improve systems by adding on to the system and building complementary tools and processes that really complement and extend existing systems and existing processes rather than always needing to bring in something new or start in from scratch. You don't need to throw out what's not working, but just because you're not getting the intended result, you can think about what changes or tweaks can be made in order to build momentum, carry on momentum, and really have true impact within organizations. So another time that DataKind has done this, really excitingly, was with New America, and this is actually some ongoing work that we have with New America's Future of Land and Housing Rights program. The New America Future of Land and Housing Rights team was already looking at a number of data points and a number of policies related to housing loss, related to evictions, related to foreclosures across the US. And the partnership between New America's Future of Land and Housing program and DataKind really arose from the New America team seeking to have a greater level of analysis and a greater level of that ability to interpret the data and make conclusions and recommendations based on all of the data available in the US on this. Some data that was easy to obtain, some that needed a little bit of work, shall we say. And so the work that we then endeavored to do, we being DataKind endeavored to do with New America, we really envisioned this as a long partnership and broke down the work into four main steps. So we wanted to start by conducting a landscape analysis of just what data was out there. Some counties, for example, finding their eviction data is very easy. For some other counties, it's a bit difficult. It might be in different forms. You might have to fill out a lot of requests for information to get that data, but really doing a little bit of a scan for what data was out there, what types of analysis was already being done, what could be added, what could be subtracted, what type of additional information could be given to policymakers, could be given to community advocates, could be given to think tanks such as New America to help influence that process. The second step that we're working on is to develop a public good. So, something that is available to multiple counties to allow counties to identify their own data, use this public good and this public toolkit to really help local level leaders understand the data in their communities, visualize the data in their communities as it relates to foreclosures and mortgages specifically, and really begin to make foreclosures, mortgages, and evictions, and really begin to make different policy decisions about where to assign more resources, whether it's financial, human capital, or something else, to have an impact on their community. The third step in our process there is looking to really collaborate and test and build upon some of these tools with the different jurisdictions. Although we started out with as a very small number, we then in our second phase moved to, I think, working with about 12 different jurisdictions. And then in future phases, we'll be expanding that even broadly to make, again, a public tool that's more widely available. But again, really making sure that the analysis that's being done is going to help those local policymakers, those local community advocates, really get to helping them define what their true problem that they may need to solve in their specific localities is. So, really, how can you, through the work that you're doing, also enable others to go through the same process of properly defining the problem, having their own coalition of change agents, working on a solution, and then really leading to impact for people and communities? And then finally, the last step in our four-step process is around documenting what we do, sharing what we do, not just with the organizations we work directly with, but also with the broader public. So if there are other jurisdictions within the US, for example, that wanted to pull in this data and wanted to use some of the same visualizations, they could go ahead and do that. So that's a future phase, but something we are excited to continue doing. After working now for over a year with the New America team and doing a very iterative process of developing one thing, testing it, deploying it, developing a new feature, testing, deploying, and developing a new, and so on and so on, we've been able to accomplish quite a bit. We've been able to locate, clean, standardize a lot of eviction and mortgage foreclosure data around the country, particularly within the Sun Belt region. And if you look online through New America's site, you can find on New America's Future of Land and Housing program a report about evictions and foreclosures, and that was powered in part by the analysis that the DataKind team did. So please check that out. It's got some pretty interesting stats and figures. The second thing we did was to really test for statistical relationships between housing loss and a variety of socioeconomic data. So we were able to look at eviction rates, for example, and compare that against a number of different socioeconomic factors that are identified in the US Census data information. So looking at information and doing analysis on a census tract or census block level, which is a locality that's smaller than a zip code, but is the way the census collects information and can report out information, looking at eviction rates. And as they differ by different races, by different economic levels, and more, and just a variety of socioeconomic levels that we were socioeconomic variables that we were able to run the analysis on. And then finally, we look to make the data accessible because, of course, data is powerful. Data that people can access and understand without needing to be a data scientist or an engineer or to learn how to code is even more powerful. And so that is what we did next, is really working with different jurisdictions to create maps, to create scatter plots, to create reports, and more to reveal what this data is saying so that it can then be put in the hands of policymakers. It can be put in the hands of decision makers. It can be put in the hands of advocates so they can understand, again, what the true state of affairs is in their jurisdiction and change policies accordingly. And so there are, again, a number of great insights that we found, and just a couple to share with you now. It's the average rate of housing loss that we saw across the Sun Belt was about 3.4%. So that really translates to 1 in 30 individuals for the time period that we did this analysis was losing their home to eviction or foreclosure every year, which is quite significant. Another bit of information that we found was the average eviction rate across the Sun Belt was about 5.1%, with the highest rate being 12.8%. So again, that translates to about 1 in every 8 renters in that jurisdiction being evicted every year. So again, a huge impact. We also found some interesting data on eviction and foreclosures as it relates to race. In some counties, in some jurisdictions, every county that was majority minority experienced housing loss. And so looking at that type of information is very powerful. And then combining that by putting this information in the hand of policymakers to make it actionable, to help inform policy discussions, to help inform the agendas of advocates is very powerful. And we've heard some great feedback, both through the New America team directly that we are working with, through some of the policymakers who are connected in that way, and also through other coalitions of city leaders who weren't even part of our the secondary study, but hearing these results, seeing the analysis, really then asked for these tools to be brought to their jurisdictions as well. And that's what's led us to conclude that 4th step that I mentioned of looking to have a more publicly available good. Because again, when you look at how we're using technology, how we're really thinking about what structures that we are working around, you want to do things that will extend the missions that already exist. And so by pulling together these different data that are already available with a little bit of work, a little bit of elbow grease, and providing a tool that really empowers people in doing that, you are then looking at innovating by adding on to the existing process, adding on to an existing policy-making process, adding on to existing policy-making around evictions and foreclosures and more, with additional data in this case, and with the additional analysis that can come from data. And so I've now spent a bit of time talking about the projects themselves and how to push forward and about building coalitions. But another thing that really does make the social impact world go round is measurements. We talk a lot about objectives and we talk a lot about measures. We talk a lot about impact all the time. But it's really important to think about how we're defining impacts. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this so that as you think through setting measures, because you will succeed hopefully, at what you measure. And so it's really important that you're setting the right targets, and you're setting targets about things that will have a good positive impact within the organization you're working with and with the constituents that organization serves. Now, a quote that I came across in the book Lean Impact, which I really enjoyed, that really stuck with me, is to relentlessly seek impact. Think like a scientist. A new drug may have all the hallmarks of success, but what matters is how it performs in clinical trials. I don't know about you, but I've certainly been in environments, especially some academic environments, some government environments, some nonprofit environments, where organizations, where individuals can fall victim to the trap of, we must continue to study this issue. We have to continue to analyze this issue. We have to continue to theorize how we might make a change, and get caught up in that instead of working and transitioning to doing and having that impact. So really have a bit of a bias there for having impact and doing something, but also let's tie that to the metrics that you set. And so also, in partnership with Lean Impact, there's a Lean Startup Company, and they have they actually have more than four, but four guidelines for setting metrics that I really resonate with, and so want to share with you today. The first is start with listening, not with metrics. And so this harkens back to my point at the start about looking at making sure you're solving the right problem. You want to talk about the impact that you want to see. You want to talk about any change that you want to have. You want to talk about existing systems, and starting with there to figure out the true problem and then the true metrics that will actually help measure the impact you want to have, as opposed to activity or doing something. The second point here is keeping your measurement light and inexpensive. I have certainly been in situations where, in order to report on the metrics that have been set, and send them out into the world, or send them out even internally to particular government agencies, the amount of time and the amount of effort it takes to gather all the data, to run the report, to then manipulate the report, to transform the report into the right format, is so burdensome, and it makes it difficult to maintain that reporting. So really, as you're defining your metrics, think through not just what is going to tell you about impact, but what are actually going to be measurement tools and methods that you can use that will ensure that you can actually continue to report on the metrics that you set. The next point they have here, I think, is really important, about worrying about bias, but giving yourself a break with statistical significance. This isn't to say that you just throw any type of significance out the window, but really focusing more on identifying places of bias throughout your existing process, identifying how data might have been biased in its collection or its analysis or in a different process, and really rooting that out as you are coming through and finalizing what metrics you're going to set for success of your program or for success of your process. And then finally, don't tie yourself up with complex methodology if you don't need, which harkens back to that second point, but limit your claims to what is sensible. I'm sure some of you can think of instances where people have claimed that they've solved poverty for 9 billion people in the world, and that sounds really great, but is it sensible? Was that something that's provable and defensible? Just think about that. And so think about that as well as you set your own metrics, and you walk that tightrope between setting metrics that really do provide success and encouragement and the right amount of shine on your work, but also don't overstate the impact that you have. So I'll just quickly wrap up here with some points that I want you to take away as you think about, again, how do you, within organizations that are structured, within organizations that are very organized, and have seemingly long times to make change, how do you continue to make change? So again, it's important to invest the time at the start to properly define the problem that you need to solve. Really make sure that you're investing that time at the start. Then finding that coalition of strong and willing partners is key. You want to have people on your change team who are going to be able to push through with you within the team, and also be advocates in their respective roles in their respective communities, even within the organization and certainly within the broader community. then remember that innovation can be additive. It doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to replace systems. It can add on to existing systems and existing processes. And then finally, create measures and objectives that do show true impact and will help the program and the change that you've tried to push through and now have successfully pushed through really have an impact, really stand on its own, and really be able to communicate that success to your team, to your organization, and to the world. And with that, thank you so much for your time today. Again, Afua Bruce at DataKind, and so happy to be here today.